The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Rosewood Palace as Princess Elena adjusted her pearl earrings. She was preparing for another tedious state breakfast when something caught her eye. Queen Margot, her sister-in-law, was wearing a stunning sapphire bracelet that Elena had never seen before. Elena knew every piece of jewelry in the royal collection. She had studied them all when she married Prince William 5 years ago. This bracelet was different. The sapphires were arranged in an unusual pattern, surrounded by tiny diamonds that sparkled like stars. "What a beautiful bracelet, Margot," Elena said, trying to sound casual as they walked toward the dining hall. Queen Margot touched the bracelet nervously. "Oh, this? Alexander gave it to me for our anniversary." Elena's heart skipped. She knew King Alexander's taste in jewelry. He always chose traditional pieces from the royal vault. This bracelet was modern, almost exotic in its design. More importantly, Elena had seen Alexander's real anniversary gift. It was a ruby necklace, still sitting in its box in his study. During breakfast, Elena watched Margot carefully. The queen kept touching the bracelet, turning it on her wrist. When Lord Camden asked about it, Margot gave the same answer about the anniversary gift. But Elena noticed how her voice changed, becoming higher and faster. After breakfast, Elena found her trusted lady-in-waiting, Sophie, in the rose garden. Sophie had served the royal family for 20 years and knew all their secrets. "Sophie, have you seen Queen Margot's new bracelet?" Elena asked. Sophie's eyes widened. "The sapphire one?" "Yes, Your Highness. She received it last week." "From whom?" Sophie looked around nervously. "A private courier brought it. No royal seal, no official papers." Elena felt a chill despite the warm sun. In the palace, everything had official papers. Every gift was recorded, every visitor logged. A private courier with no documentation meant only one thing: someone was hiding something. That afternoon, Elena visited the palace jeweler, Master Ferdinand. He had served 3 generations of royalty and could identify any piece of jewelry in the kingdom. "Ferdinand, I need your expertise," Elena said, describing the bracelet in detail. The old man's face grew pale. "Your Highness, that sounds like the work of Antonio Castellano, the Italian jeweler." "Yes, but he doesn't just make jewelry. He makes pieces for very specific clients. Secret clients." Elena's mind raced. She remembered Margot's recent trips to Rome, supposedly for charity work. The queen had returned, looking happier, younger somehow. Elena had thought it was just the Italian sun. That evening, Elena watched Margot at dinner. The queen laughed too loudly at the ambassador's jokes. She drank more wine than usual. And she kept that bracelet hidden under her sleeve, only visible when she reached for her glass. King Alexander seemed oblivious. He discussed hunting plans with the Duke, barely glancing at his wife. Elena remembered when they were first married, how Alexander couldn't take his eyes off Margot. Now, 15 years later, they were like strangers sharing a palace. After dinner, Elena followed Margot to her private chambers. She knocked softly. "Come in," Margot called. Elena found the queen standing by her window, staring at the moonlit gardens. The bracelet caught the light, throwing blue shadows on the wall. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Margot said without turning around. "The bracelet, I mean." "Yes," Elena replied carefully. "Very unique." Margot turned, and Elena saw tears in her eyes. "You know it's not from Alexander." "It wasn't a question." Elena nodded slowly. "You're too observant, Elena. Just like when you first arrived here. Always watching, always noticing things others miss." "I'm worried about you," Elena said honestly. Margot laughed, but it sounded bitter. "Worried? About the queen? I have everything. A palace, jewels, a crown, but not happiness." The words hung between them. Margot touched the bracelet again, her fingers tracing the sapphires. "Do you know what it's like, Elena, to wake up every day in a beautiful prison? To smile at state dinners while your husband talks to everyone but you?" Elena did know. She had felt the same coldness creeping into her own marriage. William was always busy with royal duties, always traveling. Their conversations had become formal, like 2 diplomats negotiating a treaty. Who is he? Elena asked gently. Margot's face changed. For a moment, she looked young again, like the bride who had walked down the cathedral aisle 15 years ago. Someone who sees me. Not the queen, not the title, just me. Before Elena could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Alexander's footsteps. Margot quickly pulled her sleeve down, covering the bracelet. She wiped her eyes and straightened her posture. In seconds, she transformed from a vulnerable woman to a perfect queen. The door opened. King Alexander entered, his face stern. Margot, we need to discuss tomorrow's ceremony. He noticed Elena and nodded. Sister, I was just leaving, Elena said. She squeezed Margot's hand quickly and left. Walking back to her chambers, Elena's mind whirled with questions. Who had sent the bracelet? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what would happen if Alexander discovered the truth? The palace had many secrets, but some were more dangerous than others. A secret admirer might seem romantic, but in the royal court, it could destroy everything. Marriages, alliances, even kingdoms had fallen for less. Elena reached her rooms and dismissed her maids. She needed to think. The bracelet was more than jewelry. It was evidence of a hidden life, a desperate escape from royal suffocation. But it was also a ticking bomb that could explode at any moment. As she prepared for bed, Elena made a decision. She would protect Margot, but she would also investigate. Someone in the palace knew more about that bracelet. Someone had helped arrange those courier deliveries. The moon cast long shadows through her window as Elena lay awake, thinking about sapphires and secrets. Tomorrow, she would start asking questions. Careful questions. Because in Rosewood Palace, the wrong question could be as dangerous as the truth. The next morning brought chaos to Rosewood Palace. A valuable painting had disappeared from the state gallery, and security was questioning everyone. Elena used the commotion to her advantage. While guards searched rooms, she slipped into the servants' quarters. She found Thomas, the head courier, organizing delivery records in a dusty back office. Thomas had worked at the palace for 30 years. Nothing arrived without his knowledge. Your Highness, Thomas bowed, surprised. How may I serve you? I'm looking for records of private deliveries, Elena said. Specifically, packages for Queen Margot. From the past month, Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Private deliveries are confidential, Your Highness. Elena stepped closer. Thomas, I'm trying to help the Queen. Please. The old courier studied her face, then sighed. He pulled out a leather ledger and flipped through pages. There have been 3 deliveries. All from Rome. No sender name. Just an initial. L. Elena's pulse quickened. Do you remember anything about the courier? Same man each time. Well-dressed, spoke with an Italian accent. He insisted on delivering directly to Queen Margot's maid. Anna. Of course. The young maid who had joined Margot's service 6 months ago. Just after the Queen's first trip to Rome, Elena thanked Thomas and hurried to find Anna. She discovered the maid in the Queen's dressing room, arranging jewelry. The girl jumped when she saw Elena. Your Highness, I didn't expect. Anna, we need to talk. Elena closed the door. About the deliveries from Rome, Anna's face went white. She clutched a necklace so tightly that her knuckles showed. I don't know what you mean. The bracelet, Anna, and the letters that came with it. At the mention of letters, Anna crumbled. She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Please, Your Highness, I never meant any harm. Queen Margot, she's been so sad. And Lord Lorenzo, he makes her smile. Lorenzo. Finally, a name. Tell me everything, Elena commanded gently. Through her tears, Anna revealed the story. During Margot's charity visit to Rome, she had toured an art gallery owned by Lorenzo Benedetti, a wealthy merchant and patron of the arts. He was charming, cultured, and most importantly, he listened to Margot. Really listened. They had talked for hours about paintings and poetry. Lorenzo saw Margot not as a queen, but as a woman who loved beauty and art. Before she left Rome, he had promised to send her something special. The bracelet arrived 2 weeks later, Anna whispered. With a letter, Queen Margot cried when she read it. Happy tears, Your Highness. I hadn't seen her cry happy tears in years. Elena felt a mix of sympathy and fear. An affair of the heart was dangerous enough. But, with a foreign merchant? The scandal would rock the kingdom. Where are the letters now? Elena asked. Queen Margot burns them after reading. Except. Anna hesitated. Except? She kept one, the first one. It's hidden in her music box, behind the dancing figure. Elena knew she was crossing a line, but she had to understand the full situation. That afternoon, while Margot attended a garden party, Elena entered the queen's chambers. The music box sat on the dresser, playing a melancholy tune when opened. Behind the delicate porcelain dancer, Elena found a folded letter. Her hands trembled as she read. My dearest Margot, our afternoon in the gallery stays with me like a dream I never want to wake from. You spoke of feeling invisible in your palace, but I see you clearly. I see the woman who knows every brushstroke of Caravaggio, who understands the loneliness in Vermeer's light. This bracelet is from my family's collection. The sapphires are the color of the Roman sky the day we met. Wear it when you need to remember that someone in this world sees your true self. Forever yours, L. Elena carefully returned the letter, her heart aching. This wasn't just an infatuation. Lorenzo had touched something deep in Margot's soul, something Alexander had forgotten existed. That evening, at the state banquet, Elena watched the royal couple with new eyes. Alexander discussed military strategies with the generals, while Margot sat silently, occasionally touching her hidden bracelet. They were like actors in a play, performing their roles perfectly but feeling nothing. During dessert, disaster nearly struck. The Italian ambassador mentioned Lorenzo Benedetti's name in conversation about art patrons. Margot's wineglass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. How clumsy of me, Margot laughed. But Elena saw her hands shaking as servants cleaned the mess. Alexander barely glanced up from his conversation. But someone else noticed. Lord Blackwood, the king's ambitious advisor, watched Margot with calculating eyes. Elena had never trusted Blackwood. He collected secrets like some men collected stamps. After the banquet, Elena cornered Margot in the hallway. We need to be careful. Blackwood is suspicious. Margot's facade cracked. Let him suspect. I'm tired of being careful, Elena. Tired of smiling while I die inside. This could destroy you, Elena warned. I'm already destroyed, Margot replied. Lorenzo just reminded me what it feels like to be alive. Before Elena could respond, King Alexander appeared. His expression was unreadable. But Elena noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw. Margot, Lord Blackwood tells me you've been receiving private correspondence. The Queen lifted her chin defiantly. I receive many letters. Charity organizations. Diplomatic courtesy. From Rome? Alexander interrupted. From merchants? Elena held her breath. This was the moment. Margot could lie, deny everything. Or she could. Yes, Margot said simply. From a friend I made during my charity work. Alexander's face darkened. We'll discuss this privately. He turned to Elena. Thank you for keeping my wife company, sister. It was a dismissal. Elena had no choice but to leave, though every instinct screamed at her to stay. As she walked away, she heard Alexander's cold voice. Show me this bracelet, Blackwood mentioned. In her chambers, Elena paced frantically. Sophie brought her chamomile tea, but Elena couldn't drink. Her mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Divorce? Exile? In the history of their kingdom, queens had been imprisoned for less. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Anna stood at the door, tears streaming down her face. Your Highness, please come. The Queen needs you. Elena found Margot in her chambers, still in her evening gown but with her jewelry removed. The sapphire bracelet lay on the dresser like evidence at a trial. He knows, Margot said simply. Not everything. But enough. What will you do? Margot picked up the bracelet, holding it to the light. Alexander gave me a choice. End all contact with Lorenzo and never speak of this again. Or face a public scandal. He'll claim I've been mentally unstable. Unfit for my duties. That's cruel, Elena breathed. That's survival, Margot corrected. A king can have mistresses. A queen can only have dignity, and only if she's careful. So, you'll give up Lorenzo? Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to her fireplace and held the bracelet over the flames. A wise queen would. A smart queen would burn this and forget it ever existed. But, Margot turned, and for the first time in years, Elena saw real fire in her eyes. But I'm tired of being wise. Tired of being smart. Maybe it's time to just be brave. The scandal broke 3 days later, but not how anyone expected. Lord Blackwood, hungry for power and sensing weakness, had hired investigators to dig into Lorenzo Benedetti's background. What they found changed everything. Elena was having breakfast when Sophie burst in, breathless. Your Highness, you must come to the throne room immediately. The throne room was in chaos. King Alexander stood rigid, his face purple with rage, while Blackwood cowered before him. Margot sat in her chair, oddly calm, still wearing the sapphire bracelet. You knew, Alexander roared at Blackwood. You knew the truth and tried to use it against me. Elena slipped in beside William, who looked as confused as she felt. What's happening? She whispered. Blackwood's investigators discovered something about the Italian merchant, William replied. But it's not what anyone thought. End quote. Queen Margot stood, her voice clear and strong. Lord Blackwood discovered that Lorenzo Benedetti is actually Count Lorenzo di Savoia, Alexander's cousin through his mother's Italian line. Elena gasped. The room fell silent. Lorenzo is family. Margot continued. He changed his name and became a merchant to escape royal duties in Italy. When I met him in Rome, he recognized me, but said nothing. We bonded over our shared prison of royal obligation. Alexander's rage had turned to confusion. But the letters, the bracelet, were from one lonely royal to another, Margot said. Lorenzo understood what it meant to lose yourself in a crown. Yes, I fell in love with him. Not romantically, but with the freedom he represented. The courage to walk away from everything. Blackwood tried to speak, but Alexander silenced him with a gesture. The king's advisor had tried to manufacture a scandal, planning to use it to gain influence. Instead, he had uncovered a family connection that made his schemes worthless. Leave, Alexander commanded Blackwood. Clear your office by noon. If I see you in my kingdom again, you'll face charges of treason. As guards escorted Blackwood out, Alexander turned to his wife. For the first time in years, he really looked at her. You were going to leave. It wasn't a question. Margot nodded. I had the tickets. Lorenzo offered to help me disappear, to start a new life as someone else. Someone free. Why didn't you? Margot touched the bracelet. Because Elena reminded me that running away isn't brave. Changing things is brave. Over the following days, the palace transformed. The truth about Lorenzo had forced uncomfortable conversations. Alexander realized how blind he had been to his wife's suffering. Margot found courage to speak about her needs, instead of suffering in silence. Elena watched these changes with mixed feelings. She was glad for Margot, but it made her examine her own marriage. William had been distant lately, consumed by his duties. Were they heading down the same path? One evening, Elena found Margot in the music room, playing piano. The queen looked younger, lighter somehow. You saved me, Elena, Margot said. If you hadn't investigated, if you hadn't cared, I would have made a terrible mistake. You saved yourself, Elena corrected. You chose to be brave. Margot smiled and pulled a small box from her pocket. Lorenzo sent this, his final gift. Inside was a simple silver ring with an inscription. To thine own self be true. He's returning to Italy, Margot explained. To face his own royal duties. But he wanted me to remember that we always have choices, even in cages. And Alexander? We're trying, Margot said honestly. 15 years of distance won't heal overnight. But we're talking. Really talking. He's canceled half his hunting trips to spend time with me. I'm teaching him about art. It's progress. That night, Elena found William in his study, surrounded by papers. She made a decision. We need to talk, she said, closing the door. William looked up, surprised. Is everything all right? No, Elena said, sitting across from him. But it can be. She told him everything. About Margot and Lorenzo. About loneliness in palaces. About the fear that they were drifting apart. William listened, his expression changing from confusion to understanding to alarm. Elena, I had no idea you felt this way. Because we stopped talking, she said. Really talking. We perform our duties, attend our functions. But when did we last share our dreams? William pushed aside his papers and took her hands. What do you dream of? For the next hour, they talked like they hadn't in years. About fears and hopes. About the weight of crowns and the price of duty. It wasn't a magical fix. But it was a beginning. The next morning, a package arrived for Elena. Inside was a sapphire pendant. Smaller than Margot's bracelet, but equally beautiful. The note read, Dear Elena, Margot told me how you helped her find her voice. This is a token of gratitude from one seeker of freedom to another. May you always remember that the greatest courage is not in running away, but in standing firm and demanding the life you deserve. Your friend in truth, Lorenzo. Elena wore the pendant to breakfast. Margot noticed immediately and smiled. They had become more than sisters-in-law. They were allies in the battle for authentic lives within palace walls. King Alexander announced reforms that shocked the court. Queens would have more autonomy, more voice in state matters. He appointed Margot as ambassador for cultural affairs, giving her purpose beyond ceremonial duties. It was unprecedented, but Alexander had learned that preserving tradition wasn't worth losing his wife. Lord Blackwood's disgrace sent ripples through the nobility. Other advisors who had thrived on palace intrigue found themselves under scrutiny. The palace, once a place of secrets and schemes, began to value transparency. 6 months later, at the summer ball, Elena watched Margot dance with Alexander. The queen wore the sapphire bracelet openly now. Its secret transformed into a symbol of renewal. Lorenzo had returned to Italy and accepted his role as count, but his letters to Margot continued, now official correspondence between royal cousins. They look happy, William said, joining Elena on the balcony. They look real, Elena corrected. That's better than happy. William pulled her close. Thank you for being brave enough to demand real from us too. As fireworks lit the night sky, Elena thought about the strange path that had led them here. A secret bracelet had nearly destroyed a marriage, but instead had saved two. Sometimes the greatest treasures weren't jewels, but the truths they helped reveal. The music drifted through the palace as couples danced and laughed. There would always be duties and obligations, ceremonies and protocols. But now there was also understanding, communication, and the radical idea that even queens deserved to be seen and heard. Elena touched her sapphire pendant and smiled. In the end, the truth about the bracelet wasn't about betrayal or scandal. It was about the courage to demand more from life, even when you already seemed to have everything. And that was a lesson worth more than all the jewels in the royal vault.